Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking more closely at the two energies, masculine and feminine energy, and looking at the 6 variables that make up masculine and feminine energy. They're categories, and each of those categories have 5 subcategories, strengths or virtues of those energies. And of course, when those virtues get dialed up to the extreme, too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing. Virtues become vices, strengths become weaknesses. And of course, as we learned last time, these energies shine more brightly when they're used together. That's why organizations made up of all men or all women don't have the same kind of good results that you get from an organization that has both men and women in it. You see, 70% of us are pulled towards the attributes of our gender, just due to our socialization. And that means that it's more likely that we're going to have too much of that energy together when you have all groups of men or all groups of women. And that's why diversity shows such great returns for companies. Diversity pays dividends for companies, but it also pays dividends for us as individuals by using the attributes of both genders. You see, women who have been conditioned to be caring and compassionate will then find the courage to put up their hands and volunteer for a risk assignment. Meanwhile, men who have been conditioned to take risks from the time they're little boys, they'll find the attribute of feeling others' feelings and caring, and they can engender the loyalty of their employees. The first variable is the we-me variable, and it is all about the difference between thinking about ourselves or thinking about the group. Neither are bad, both have their strengths and virtues. They're only bad when they're dialed up to the extreme. If you tested feminine energy in the we variable, you quite probably will find the courage to do things for the group that you wouldn't find to do for yourself. Commonly, people in the we virtue will introduce themselves when compared to the group. For example, they'll say, I'm in investor relations at Potash Corp. Whereas someone in the me variable would say, I'm a vice president of investor relations at the Potash Corp. You see the difference? People in the we variable are in feminine energy. People in the me variable are in masculine energy. People in the me virtue like to set themselves apart. They like to be different. It's important for them to be unique. They're very proud of being self-sufficient and independent. They like to take center stage. And they believe that the best chance of survival is by depending on themselves. I compare this to the wagon train and the Lone Ranger. People on the wagon train, they all set out together. They travel together, collectively in groups. They decided every day what time they were going to leave and what time they were going to stop and make camp at night. They rolled out their beds together. They cooked together. It was a collective action. Meanwhile, sitting way up high on the hill was the Lone Ranger. He took care of himself. He had to be his own watchman, not like those people in the wagon train that took place being the watchman. He had to kind of sleep with his gun by his side and be ready for any intruder that might come his way. But he felt free to make his own decisions and do his own thing. He was very independent. Now, sometimes he came together with the people in the wagon train and gave them information that helped them protect themselves. And sometimes it was important for him to be part of that wagon train because there was a collective action and he was protected with the group. So you see, it's always better when it can come together. So those who have the virtue of feminine energy always pay attention to the collective, to the group. Those who have the virtue of the masculine energy make sure that they take care of themselves. When either one of these virtues spirals out of control and becomes a vice, what happens is those people who are interested in the group, they end up losing their identity to the group. They don't know who they are anymore. They only know what the group tells them. An ultimate extreme example of this would be the people in Jonestown that drank the Kool-Aid. You remember that story? Drinking the Kool-Aid has become a metaphor for people saying that they end up taking someone else's opinion without thinking it through themselves. And that's what happens to people who are too much in their feminine energy. Those people who are in their masculine energy to the extreme, they become emotionally disconnected from others. They have no concern for the group whatsoever. And if they ever need the group, they don't ever have their support, so therefore they lose them. Now in this case, it was Jimmy Jones that told everybody to drink the Kool-Aid. He was again an extreme example of someone who had spiraled out of control into his masculine energy. People who are using both energies think about themselves and what's good for them, but they never lose sight of what the group wants. They're using both, and remember that both shine more brightly when used together. An example of this would be Steve Jobs. He'd been away from Apple for a number of years, and in fact, he'd been fired from Apple. And they called him back when they had only 4% market share, $1 billion in debt, and were months away from insolvency. And while he was technically a Lone Ranger, he understood the group. And he gathered the employees together, and he inspired them by saying, we're not about just making boxes. We're about making the world a better place. And with that, the employees went to work. They had a higher mission. They had a calling. A little while later, they made Apple the most valuable publicly traded company in the world. Have a look at the virtues for feminine energy in the we variables. They're worried about the collective. They want to integrate with others. They're very inclusive. They're very other-oriented, and they want to reach consensus. Now have a look at the virtues from the masculine energy me variable. It's all about the individual. It's about differentiating yourself. It's about being exclusive and special. It's about operating in self-interest. And it's also being very autonomous. What's interesting about these is that they really don't operate in isolation from one another. So for example, with inclusive and exclusive, I remember being in a meeting where we were making an important decision, and my opinion was heard and valued. And I left that meeting feeling very included. A short few hours later, we were on the golf course. And women at this particular course were not allowed to tee off before 2 o'clock. So this group of men put me in the last foursome, and they all teed off. And our group, if it had been all males, would have been allowed to tee off. But we had to sit and wait until it was 2 o'clock before the starter would let our group go because there was a single woman in it. And of course, that made me feel very excluded. So these two virtues do not operate in isolation from one another. You don't always feel included or always feel excluded. You kind of move back and forth between them based on the circumstances and the situation. The we virtues easily become vices if we don't include some masculine energy me. So for example, if you are concerned about the collective, but overly concerned, you can end up with cult-like behavior. Remember the Jonestown Massacre. If you are very concerned about integrating with others, you can end up being herded like the group. If you're very concerned about things being inclusive, things can become homogenized, where there's no differentiation whatsoever. And if you're very other-oriented, there can be a complete loss of self. And if you're concerned about reaching consensus, you can become very dependent and give yourself away. It never feels good to give up your own opinion just to reach consensus. When we have we vices, it's mob mentality. We lose our personal identity to the group. When too much value is placed on what the group is thinking or what others are saying, or when too much value is placed on having others speak our language, that's what leads to groupthink in the boardroom. And then we don't have a good diversity of opinions, and we never reach the best decision. If you're in the me virtues of the me variable, you're going to be very concerned about the individual, and when you dial it up to the extreme, you risk becoming a narcissist, only concerned about yourself and not others. Another me virtue would be differentiation. Differentiation is good, but not when you segregate yourself from others. It's good to be exclusive, but not if that leads to prejudice. And it's good to act in your own self-interest, but not if you become egocentric. And it's good to be autonomous, but not if you become disconnected. When I worked at Potash, we used to say all boats rise and fall on the same water. And what we were really saying is, what's good for the industry is good for us. So we knew that we wanted our own self-interest, we wanted to compete with our competitors, we wanted a higher market share, but we also didn't want to set out to kill the goose that laid the golden egg by ruining the industry in order to be at the top. When an individual takes care of themselves at the expense of the group, they end up losing loyalty, support. I experienced this personally. We had a CEO who purchased for himself a membership in a men's-only golf club. Now, that was a systematic abuse and something that really shouldn't have happened. But it was especially disconcerting for myself as the only female senior executive. I wouldn't be allowed to golf there. And we had female board members even that couldn't golf at his golf club. And it made all of us feel less loyal towards that man. I remember a few months after he bought it, he invited some of my clients out to golf and said, "Oh, Betty Ann, you can meet us afterwards in the clubhouse for a bite to eat." He wanted that golf club membership, but he ended up losing the support of myself and many other women at the organization in doing so.